Hello there! Welcome to Skeleton Productions. I'm Conor Grace Cocon. Let's get into the video. In today's video, we're going to be looking at what if America suddenly descended into civil war. Now, at the time of recording this, it's just come on the news about the Senate race, which is finally being concluded. Finally, if you watch some old videos, you'll see how I really go on about the fact that even now, in January, they still haven't finished counting all the votes, but obviously the decision, it's clear who has won the presidency. I just find it funny that they still haven't finished, and that vote was all the way in November. So taking 2 months and you still haven't finished counting. But anyway, it looks at the moment of the time of recording, both seats in Georgia are going to go Democrat, which means that the Democrats are going to have control over the Senate, and they already have control over the House, and they are also in the White House, obviously. So that means that from an executive and from a legislative standpoint, the Democrats have carte blanche within reason, that's the caveat, within reason to enact whatever policies they want. This scenario is obviously very, very heated at the moment, and we can kind of imagine why it would be. This election, like nearly every election, is held up as it's a do or die moment, and it's a thing of sometimes tensions and emotions can run very high, and sometimes people can kind of forget the wider picture. They can forget, as we've covered in the other videos about like Trump versus Biden, so definitely check those out. They tend to forget that the US founding fathers obviously set up America specifically so that crazy changes can't take place. Yeah, so just chill out, everyone. Just take a chill pill, okay? The Democrats aren't going to be able to do whatever they want, and the Republicans aren't going to have the opposite of what everything they want, okay? It's going to be relatively moderate. Joe Biden is a moderate. Most of the people he's got around him are relative moderates. I know from a conservative standpoint, it's not what people would want, but at the same time, he's not Karl Marx, okay? Just chill out, people, okay? Like maybe on some of the kind of wokey agenda kind of thing, maybe with a few little changes here and there, but again, it's not like the deepest thing. Like the world's not going to implode because of this. In this video, what we're going to do is, so big shout out to What If Alt This and big shout out to Alternative History Hub. Both of those channels, they've done variations on this theme in terms of like what if America went to civil war, especially What If Alt This. So he's done multiple videos looking at these different scenarios. I think that those videos are brilliant. At the same time, because they're American, I think that a lot of the time they focus a lot more on domestically how America would be, which is fine, not criticizing you guys, obviously your election and stuff. But at the same time, I think for this video, we're going to focus a lot more on like the geopolitics of that. So that's basically the situation in the rest of the world. Now I know What If Alt This has done videos about what the future war is likely to be in the 2020s and 2030s. I get that. However, I think that this video hopefully encompasses a lot more of that and also looks at some other like things that haven't necessarily been focused on. This video isn't meant as like a diss video at all. Think of it almost like as a complementary thing, and to really look at the situation on the ground and to really think, how could the world suddenly manifest itself? So there's two scenarios we can think of. There's the case where America just has a very quick civil war, however bloody it is, ends up affecting like domestic policy quite a lot, obviously, in terms of if it's a very bloody thing, then it's going to be harder to like unite the country afterwards. But we're going to focus more in this video on the length of the civil war, because if we just have the scenario one where it's a very quick and sharp thing, not much changes, like really, like kind of there might be some flare up, but at the end of the day the natural order in the world will kind of resume itself. However, we're going to imagine this is a long drawn out civil war, so much so that it distracts America and makes it almost impossible for America to obviously fight this civil war while also maintaining this international kind of like world system. Because what you have to understand is, as we've said in other videos, for the last 250 years you've had English speaking liberal democratic societies, i.e. the British Empire with Pax Britannica, followed by America, which is basically empire, with Pax Americana. And in that time you've had free trade, you've had capitalism, you've had relatively limited government, you've had democracy, you've had all these kind of things. The whole concept of like international law, these are concepts which you don't really see. These concepts didn't come out of Asia, they didn't come out of Africa, they didn't come out of Latin America, they didn't even come out of most places in Europe. These are very much kind of like Anglo-Saxon kind of like mindsets in terms of these are universal laws, universal human rights. The United Nations was set up in America. You had Bretton Woods, you have the World Bank, you had the IMF, etc., all of them set up in America in post-World War II. That's because America was the hegemon at that time. It was the world power, it was the superpower at that time. It was unrivaled, but obviously all the other countries in the world were been completely devastated by World War II, whereas America was relatively safe. What we have to understand is this: America, because of its geographic position in the world, on one side of the ocean it's 3,000 miles to Europe. On the other side it's 3,000 miles, or probably more than that, to Asia. And north and south, north you got Canada, which has a tenth of the population of the US and is mainly like frozen. Most of the Canadian population live within, I think, like 100 miles or so of the US border. And then to the south you've just got Mexico, which obviously it's got corruption, it's got disorganization. Their military can't even like control their own like drug lords and stuff. And obviously the Caribbean, again, like not enough force. America is actually, strategically speaking, one of the safest countries on earth. Like it can't really be touched by many other countries. That allows it to, like, if it wants to focus on the rest of the world and doesn't really have to worry about its own internal security much. But at the same time, the last like 70 or so years have been an aberration. They've been the anomaly. They've not been the norm in terms of American history. For the vast majority of American history, they have been isolationist. If they're going down isolationism, protectionism, if they go through the thing of actually let the rest of the world deal with the rest of the world, we're just going to focus in on ourselves, they easily could. They already aren't dependent on, for instance, Middle Eastern oil. Their troops being in the Middle East is more to control the global like kind of oil supply. It's a long time since the 1970s and the oil shock. Like they're not dependent on Middle East oil, not really dependent much on trade anyway. I'm going to have on stats on screen here, hopefully, if I remember, the stats showing what percentage of that trade makes up like the US economy, and it's relatively tiny in grand scheme of things. Like if America didn't trade with the rest of the world, it'd still be fine because you still got an internal market of well over 300 million people. America is strong. It's got nearly all the resources. It's got like every climate, like it's powerful, right? Militarily speaking, who's going to invade America? Almost no one. And then even if you did invade them, never mind the fact they've got the biggest army that's ever existed, they've also got a heavily armed population, which we discussed last time. 300 million guns held by about 100 million gun owners. Good luck trying to invade that country, yeah, like when they've got military grade weapons. With this civil war scenario, we have to think of this almost as America imploding in and of itself. Yeah, it doesn't mean that America is going to completely collapse. People aren't going to invade it. People, like the whole place isn't going to fall in itself. But it's a thing of psychologically, they will look more inwards. That's what this video is going to be looking at. It's going to be looking at what would happen in the vacuum of a post-Pax Americana, a post-world in which America is the top dog and America sets the rules of what is deemed as like universal, what is deemed as like international norms, what is deemed as all these things. Yeah, that's what we're going to look into in this video. So naturally, when we look at this, we have to think about what countries are most kept in check by the American world order. What countries oppose the American world order? Probably best to actually start describing what this world order is. Throughout most of human history, the norm has been, of course, that powerful countries invade their weaker neighbors and impose like all different things on them. They conquer more territory, etc. And in the last 70 years or so, by and large, you've seen a rejection of that. There have been very few wars of conquest, and so most conflicts that have happened in the last like 70 years, by and large, they've been civil wars. Occasionally countries have been invaded, but again, that's been more for like regime change. So if you think of like the Iraq war, for instance, very few countries actually kind of get invaded. But that's kind of because America, being an ex-colony, like had this whole thing of like being anti-imperialist. Whether they obviously occasionally dipped into that, of course, is that's through their history. However, ignoring that for the side, yeah, right? If you look at what countries are around the world and have not necessarily global ambitions, but certainly regional ambitions, then we can start to see what this kind of situation would be. So first of all, let's start with the obvious one, which is China. It's either the biggest economy in the world or it's the second biggest still. It has the second largest army. It has 1.3 billion people. It's an absolute juggernaut. Each year it's growing more and more. Its GDP is growing like kind of breakneck speed. Even while the rest of the world goes on lockdown and stuff and has been really devastated by the coronavirus, China somehow is still, at least on paper, they are still growing at a breakneck speed. China is obviously contained by all the US bases around the world. Hopefully on the screen now we'll have a map of all of the military bases around the world. So as you can see, they surround China and they surround Russia, which we're going to get onto in a moment. This means that China's ability to project its power is very, very limited. It's limited by countries such as Japan, limited by countries such as South Korea, limited by countries such as Taiwan. Further south, you've got the Philippines, Philippines, you've got Malaysia, Vietnam, India, which are hostile power as well, in its backyard as such. Each of these countries either have US military bases, or they are like have arms supplied like to them by the United States. And so as a result, they're very strong and they're very like hostile to China. If they didn't have America backing them up, their strength diminishes by a great factor. So if America withdrew all of its troops and just sent them back home to go and fight in this civil war, and like left the rest of like the Far East by itself, then inevitably China would seize on that opportunity. First of all, it would invade Taiwan, which has always been seen as a breakaway province ever since like the People's Republic of China was first set up in 1949. So when China became communist, the nationalists fled to Taiwan, and they've been in government ever since. However, China has never recognized that, and they've always seen it as that's a breakaway province we need to reclaim. And the only thing that has stopped it being reclaimed is the fact that the US are based there. It almost think of it like an unsinkable aircraft carrier, which is something it's been described as, right? Without the America being there, yes, Taiwan is very powerful, but it doesn't pale in comparison. Like if China really wanted to go for it, there'd be nothing to stop it apart from American might that stops them. The same thing also goes with Japan. Japan since World War II has demilitarized. Yeah, it's become a very pacifist nation, kind of as a rejection of the kind of militarism of the war. However, we are starting to see things going opposite direction with that. Japan has become more militaristic over the years. If America left, you can bet your bottom dollar that Japan would put lots and lots of resources very quickly into rearming the Japanese military, and to building a very strong navy, very strong air force, very strong army and stuff, yeah, to be able to stand against the rise of China. India as well, as we've mentioned, the Chinese, obviously their route to the rest of the world kind of goes through the Straits of Malacca, which is in Malaysia, and then obviously goes into the Indian Ocean. If the Indian Navy was strong enough, it could stop the Chinese in their tracks. However, the Indians haven't really put as much money into the Navy as they probably should have, and so as a result of that, China, if it wants to expand, it has allies in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, in Burma, in Nepal, in Bhutan, and in Sri Lanka. So literally India by itself is surrounded. Yes, India has a huge population, and yes, it's also grown very rapidly, but it's not grown as rapidly and been as focused as China has. And also India has a very good reputation for having a strong land army, but it doesn't have a very strong reputation for being a naval power. And so that means that actually with India surrounded on all sides by hostile powers, and also with a few skirmishes that have happened across the years between China and India, there was even one, I believe, last year and stuff as well. Because of this, it means that actually India is not in a strong enough position to really stand against China. If China fully wanted to exert its their dominance in the region, it could, and India wouldn't be in a position to really stop that. Within East Asia, within South Asia, Southeast Asia, that tiny little section of the world has at least half of the world's population. That's huge, right? So whoever has dominance in that region actually has control over at least half of the world's population. Quite a lot of the resources of the world are also connected to that. So if China has dominance in that region, then it can do kind of what it wants in quite a lot of the rest of the world. And you also see this as well with regard to the Korean peninsula. Again, South Korea is defended by US troops from North Korea. If the Americans suddenly withdrew from South Korea and Japan, the North Koreans would invade South Korea, and if they were backed up by China, then they very easily could take over the region. However, obviously China sees North Korea as very much a loose cannon, and the only reason why the Chinese prop up the North Koreans is because North Korea is more of a Chinese ally than the American ally. This is why they intervened in the Korean War. They don't want US troops right on their border, which is obviously understandable from their position. And so as a result of that, they've kept the North Korean government intact, because they know that at very least it's not going to allow US troops on their borders. North Korea will do a lot of crazy stuff, but they're not going to allow US troops to be on the border, which is the only concern that China has. Certainly doesn't care about their human rights. If they then were able to take over the whole of South Korea, China would very much, they probably would like take over like the North Korean government, install a puppet regime. Like they try to make Korea like basically China's China, if that makes sense. The way that China has like rapidly grown from like the third world country to like kind of to a first world country, like pretty much within the space of about 30 years, that's what they would try and do to North Korea. And actually they would try and force a lot of the people in South Korea to spend a lot of money in North, much in the same way as West Germany and East Germany. You know, when the two united, West Germany to this day has been paying a lot of money to bring the East of Germany up to standard, basically. That's the situation in the Far East. Now, if we were to look at the Middle East, then it becomes a bit more interesting. There's two main powers in the Middle East, really. Saudi Arabia is pretty much a paper tiger, yeah. They spend a lot on defense, but their army isn't really worth anything, right? They just spend a lot on like fancy fighter jets, but they don't have the capacity to really actually use them effectively, and the same thing with their military, etc., etc. Saudi Arabia, which has a population of 20 million, and you have Iran, which has a population of 80 million. Iran already has ambitions to basically recreate a kind of Persian Empire as such. So even after the Iraq War, where America went in and kicked out Saddam Hussein and tried to install like kind of like democratic government, etc., etc., what they forgot is that the majority of people in Iraq are Shia and Iran is Shia. So you kick out Saddam Hussein, who's Sunni, and then you have democracy in Iraq, and you have the Kurds, the Shia Arabs, and the Sunni Arabs, and all three of them don't like each other. But guess what? The Sunni Arabs are in the majority, so they can do whatever they want in Iraq. They then go, right, we want to be aligned with Iran. So you fought a long, bloody war for all these years just to basically allow like Iran to kind of come in through the back door. You see also Iran like arming rebels in Yemen with the Houthi rebels, and you see Iran being very friendly to the Assad regime, who again, you know, in that situation there, you have like Syria being a majority Sunni Arab country, but Assad and his like forces, they are Shia, and they are very closely tied to Iran. In Lebanon and in Israel, you have Hezbollah, you know, and they are a Shia like kind of like Arab like kind of sect as well. They're fundamentalist terrorists, and they get funding from Iran. Already, you're seeing Iran's influence being spread across the whole of the Middle East, right? You look at Saudi Arabia, yeah, so where's most of the oil? In the East. What is the majority sect, like kind of Muslims living in Saudi Arabia, like in the eastern part? Shia Arabs, right? So again, you know, it's all around the Persian Gulf, which also is where most of Saudi Arabia gets its oil from. So again, 80 million versus 20 million. And you know, Iran is very, very strong. We saw this in the Iran-Iraq war, and you see this in many other conflicts. Like Iran is stronger than it actually looks. Without the presence of American troops, there's nothing to stop them from basically working with the Shia Arab like kind of allies and basically pushing the Saudis out of the Gulf entirely and having control over the whole of like the Persian Gulf, which is about, from memory, it's about 50% of the world's oil supply. Those stats may probably have changed like since the era of fracking, but I know that it used to at least be 50%, if not slightly more. This would mean that Iran and its allies would have control over the majority of the world's oil supply. Now, I know obviously people are moving further away from fossil fuels, but at the end of the day, there are still many countries that are very reliant on that, and certainly for cars, certainly for to fly planes and stuff. At the moment, for like jets and stuff, you kind of need oil still. We haven't been able to necessarily work out how to do that on a large, like scalable level. If this was to happen, it would push the world more towards renewable as a reaction to that, because they'd be like, well, we don't want to be paying the Iranians and their allies like a lot of money for this. At the same time, in the interim period, Iran and its allies would basically have much of the world kind of like by the balls, basically. Now, interestingly enough, the next power that's going to go a bit like kind of AWOL in the Middle East is actually going to be Turkey. So Turkey, which is on paper a US ally. In reality, especially over the last few years with President Erdogan, they have become very expansionist. The Turks obviously historically had the Ottoman Empire, which controlled much of the Middle East and North Africa and the Balkans. They have very much ambitions to enact something like that again. Turkey has fingers in Egypt, in Libya, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Palestine, all these different places. And on top of that, Turkey is trying to expand its control over the Aegean Sea. So they're having a lot of conflict at the moment between themselves and Greece. So Greece obviously spends a lot on the military, but Turkey, although it's in NATO, it has the second largest military in NATO, and most of that is aimed towards the Greeks. Obviously the Greeks, most of their military is aimed towards the Turks, which is a very strange thing that you're both in a defensive union, but you spend most of your money on defense, trying to make sure you can defend against the other one. But either way, realistically, Turkey would win in any kind of like conflict between like themselves and Greece. Again, in the absence of America, there's nothing to stop Turkey from being able to swallow up like quite a lot of like kind of the region there. Certainly, for instance, the Isle of Cyprus, the Turks already have control over North Cyprus. Without the Americans being there, there's nothing to stop them from also being able to take over the whole island if they want to. I'm not saying that any of this stuff will definitely happen, by the way. Just make that caveat. I'm not saying it will happen. I'm saying that there would be nothing on a military level that would actually stop that from happening. Then we also have to think about Russia. Under Putin, they have ambitions to, in many regards, not necessarily recreate like the Soviet Union, but Russia has always wanted to keep control over its near abroad, as it calls it. So countries in Central Asia, countries in the Caucasus, and countries in Eastern Europe, they want to have control over them. So if you see the the invasion of Crimea, subsequent kind of like little wars that they have like in Ukraine, in Georgia, many of these other places, where the Russians kind of end up having like they arm different rebels in different places to kind of have ongoing like tensions and conflict and stuff. NATO without America is almost like it's nothing that's that serious, if that makes sense. Like America makes up like a huge percentage of NATO's like military spending. It's not to say that the other countries in NATO wouldn't contribute and that they wouldn't they couldn't form like a kind of defensive union against Russia, and they probably would be able to stand a decent chance. But at the same time, let's be real, Russia is more militarily prepared for a war than most of the countries in Europe. Countries like Germany are still obviously, again, like Japan, very much went down like a pacifist route. However, unlike Japan, which has become more militaristic, Germany is still very much a kind of like passive like kind of country. And we already see this. Russia and Germany, they do like deals and stuff, like they have very like strong like kind of like ties with each other. And so whenever America and Britain are hostile to Russia, Germany always kind of like sits that one out and stuff. So lots of things could happen in Eastern Europe, particularly the Poles and the countries in the Baltic region are very worried about this. Russia has an enclave, which is in Kaliningrad, with Russia being very friendly towards the government in Belarus, and also having the ability, if it wanted to take Belarus quite easily. They could, in a pincer movement, completely cut off Poland from the countries in the Baltic states and reclaim the Baltic republics as part of this new kind of Russian empire, or like ex kind of Soviet Union in a sense. Again, there's nothing to stop Russia from being able to swallow up like huge chunks of land if they wanted to. Finally, we have to talk about places like Israel. If they were surrounded by hostile kind of like regimes, I know that at the moment they're doing a lot of like peace deals with a lot of these countries. There's a lot of reconciliation. At the same time, a country like Iran, which are like very like fundamentalist, like with their like interpretation of their religion, they see Israel as like the little Satan as such, with America being the so-called Great Satan. In the Middle East, that's completely like kind of without the presence of American troops to defend Israel, and without like the ability to supply Israel. Would Israel be able to stand on its own? Historically, it always has. At the same time, it would be very difficult, and like kind of like Israel at this point couldn't necessarily expect much help from Europe, And yeah, so the prospects of Israel and the continued survival of the Jewish state is very much, it hangs in the balance. In my opinion, I think that they probably could survive, but I think that it's by no means certain if America completely withdrew from it in the region. Not saying that they would. America and Israel obviously have very strong ties, and Israel is one of the countries which America obviously gives a lot of military funding to and would like want to keep very strong relations to. At the same time, if America was unable to, or for whatever reason unwilling to support them, then they would be in a sticky situation. We're going to talk about what would happen in many other places in the world. So to be perfectly honest, without American presence in like Latin America and in Africa and many other places in the third world, at this point in time, not much changes. America for the last, since the Cold War, hasn't really focused on the third world, because during the Cold War, the Soviet Union pumped a lot of money into third world, like kind of uprisings and revolutionary movements, and so it made strategic sense for America to really care about what's happening in its backyard and like in the third world in general. Over the last 30 years, there's not been a need for that. Countries in Latin America are not suddenly going to turn like kind of Islamist. They're not suddenly going to become overly like pro-China or overly pro-Russia just for the sake of it. America's focus really hasn't been on this part of the world, so at this point, not much would really change. However, what would change is probably the main countries that are very, very strong allies with the United States. Britain, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand, the so-called Kanzak countries, they most likely, out of a fear of like being completely lost to the world, would really like tie themselves very, very closely together. We already have the Five Eyes program, which is basically like Britain, Canada, America, Australia, New Zealand. All five of them share military intelligence with one another, and so you'd likely see a continuation of that. You probably see maybe NATO survive, but maybe a lot of the countries on the continent of Europe probably wouldn't. Some of them would. I think some of the countries in Eastern Europe definitely are very pro-NATO, but I think that countries such as France and Germany and many other places in Western Europe, they are much more inclined to support a European army because they want a closer like European Union, and they'd be much more focused on it being like a kind of defensive kind of thing rather than looking at it as, yeah, let's be part of NATO still. I think if America kind of collapsed in on itself, then I think that they would use that as a kind of opportunity to exit NATO, which realistically speaking, the amount that they contribute to it over the last 30 years has been pretty negligible. Most of them haven't even met the 2% like kind of like target of the 2% of their GDP being spent on military. Yeah, most of them haven't even met that target. So that's the kind of way of saying, yeah, we don't really care about you, to be honest. So if that happens, then I think that a lot of other countries will kind of like peel away from NATO, but I think that it would expand in certain ways because the other English-speaking kind of the other countries in the Anglosphere, they would kind of like more tightly kind of club together. And then finally, I think that France has already taken a more active role in the Middle East and in North Africa. And I think that more likely than not, I think France it would have to flex its muscles a bit more, and like they would probably be the main kind of like Western force to get involved. Britain and America, because of the legacy of the Iraq War, have kind of been, they've been very hesitant to get involved in the Middle East, but I think France, as we can see, has been taking a very active role in many of these places, and I think that France would kind of, France, which has obviously always been hostile as to the kind of to what they see as like the Anglo-Saxons, and like their dominance. So France would very much want to exert more of its dominance over that region. So I think that kind of covers most of the geopolitical situation around the world. Obviously there'll be some nuances. Obviously not every country that I've mentioned would immediately enact like this, but I think that generally speaking, their policy goals, their strategic goals are as such, and therefore if they were to act on them, being stronger countries dealing with weaker countries, it's like the old thing of the strong do as they will and the weak suffer as they must. This has been what international policy has always been. With America, at least there'd be a pretense of this kind of, we're spreading freedom and democracy, people, man, like just, you know, like peace and love, man, all that kind of stuff, yeah, right, all that propaganda. But at the same time, it at least allowed for those sort of things. You know, the current time we're living in now has actually been the most peaceful in all of human history. Doesn't feel like it, but it actually is. Trust me on this, yeah, right? The data bears this out. But all of that could very quickly change, and we go back to a thing of, you know, Russia and China and all these other countries, they don't even pretend to be spreading freedom and democracy. They are, it's, you know, it's just naked like aggression, naked kind of like dominance, and like just a show of force and stuff, right? Not to like disparage these countries at all, but it's just a thing of like, realistically, they have no fluffy illusions about this kind of like utopian, like kind of internationalist kind of like thing. They are very much nationalists, and they very much focus on what's in their national interest. Now, before we go any further with this, yeah, we're almost finished now. But if you liked what we've seen so far, like, I would definitely say hit the like button, yeah? Hit the like button. Hit the like button like it just cussed your mum. Hit the like button like it just like tried to slide in your girlfriend's DM. Hit the like button like, I can't even think it. Just hit it, yeah. Like, don't even hit it too hard. You can just if you're kind of more of a pacifist person, you can just lightly tap it. Like, just, if you're already signed into YouTube, do me a favor, just turn the thing blue. Like, you know, just blue, like that color, okay? Just turn it like, or you press it once, bloop, and then it goes blue, and then that's it. Like, you don't have to do anything, because I've been saying like to subscribe. Like, some of you might already be subscribed, and you might be subscribed to loads of other ones, but I don't want notifications, whatever. You know, and you might not want to write a comment. Like, some people can't read and write. I do understand this, yeah. That's why people on YouTube, right? They don't want to have to read and write things. They don't want to have to like write a comment. Come on now, that's for noobs. So at very least, turn the like blue, and we're trying to go for a target now of 20 likes. Yeah, if we get 20 likes for this video, I know it sounds like a small amount. If we get 20 likes, that will really help the algorithm for this channel. So 20 likes, let's do this. I know you can do this. I believe in you. Yeah, they don't want you to win. They don't want you to hit that like button. So you got to hit that like button. Hit it now. So now that we've dealt with like how the rest of the world would be, now let's scale it back. How would America be? So I think that the mindset of America would very much be first of all, isolationist, yeah? The best illustration of this would be is pretty much just after World War One. After World War One, it went into full isolationist mode. There was a Red Scare, there was race riots, etc. And I think that, like, I'm not saying that Donald Trump is like a massive like racist or anything like that. When there's a civil war, a lot of the kind of worst elements within a society kind of come to the forefront, and also people from outside of that place can also come in and start causing trouble as well. And I think that the conservative side, I think, as we discussed before, would most likely win, like militarily speaking, like in terms of like kind of, and then also in terms of like kind of like private ownership of guns. And just, yeah, like there's been very few civil wars where the more like kind of liberal, hey man, the peace and love side have somehow won. So yeah, let's assume, for instance, it's like the Spanish Civil War. So what would end up coming out of that? So I think as a reaction to that, like the conservative side there would really double down on, you know, family values, religion, patriotism, etc., or probably not even patriotism, nationalism. It would be a complete kind of like clamp down on a lot of things that like liberal America has kind of become like nowadays. And you know, I think both from a legislative kind of like standpoint, and from the side of like the judiciary as well, and also like the judicial side, there would be a complete overhaul. And I think that I think very much I think that conservatives, as much as they might in the moment be excited by, some of them might be excited by the idea of there being a civil war and like would cheerlead it on. I would urge like a thing of caution, because I think that Donald Trump supporters, for instance, if the current tensions continue to rise and they didn't accept Joe Biden being the president on January 20th, and if it got nasty, if it got very violent and stuff, I don't think that they would like the kind of America that they would get. I don't like as it says in the Bible, yeah, like he that troubleth his own house shall inherit the wind, and the fool shall be the servant of the wise. And I think everything that they love about America, I think that they would end up losing in that moment. I think that they have to be very careful about going down this road. I think that the founding fathers, if they could see what was happening to America now, would be kind of turning their grave more in the sense of, regardless, well, first of all, obviously, regardless of all the kind of like social things, I mean, they weren't like, they were progressive for the time, they weren't like that progressive by today's standards. Like slavery, women's rights, etc., you know, go on. But they would be more horrified, I believe, by the lack of respect for the process of electing governments and for like the peaceful like transfer of power from one like party to the next. America, as it's standing now, is very much looking like a kind of third world like a tyranny. Like kind of like it's very much looking like people not kind of getting, it's 4 years, people, you can wait 4 years, like just chill out, like kind of like there's not, you know, Joe Biden's not going to come in and like kind of like turn America into some sort of like lefty, like kind of like Bolshevik kind of like communist state, yeah, right? Just chill out. You're still going to have the election in 2024. Chill out. If you don't like his policies, if the country don't like his policies, they can vote them out. In 2 years' time, you can vote out like the Democrats the control of the House and the Senate. It's not that deep, people. Chill out. You did it in 2010. You know, you didn't like Barack Obama. He won all 3 houses then. America didn't go into like some... I know you're all crying about like when Obama was president, but the world didn't end then, right? And the same way, like when Donald Trump won in 2016 for all the liberals, everyone was all screaming and going, ah, he's going to do this and that. He didn't even manage to build the wall. He didn't even manage to build a wall, and he had the presidency and both houses of Congress, yeah? Like, so just chill out, everyone. Just chill. There's only so much that a president and the House of Congress can do, and anything that can be done can be undone. So just chill out. Just chill. Okay? Please, America, do not go down this path. Please. Like, as someone who loves America, someone who deeply respects it and its history and its like founding principles, really, I really urge, don't go down this path. Yeah. Let Joe Biden like become the next president. Yeah. Peacefully. You can stand against him in 2024 by all means, but please stop with this thing of like the election was rigged. Like, even if it was rigged to a certain level, yeah, it's like, you know, in 2000, yeah, like kind of like people like said like that election was rigged. In 2016, people said it was rigged. Like, just chill. Like, if you can't accept, there's no democracy breaks down when the losing side doesn't accept that it's lost. Yeah, you lost. Okay, move on. There's always the next one. Okay, please like move on with this, because there's nothing worse than a sore loser. And people who become very sore losers become very bitter, and it's a thing of, and I'll be saying the same thing if it was the Democrats like who had lost and they were going on like this, yeah, like please understand that what like the little that you gain from going down this route is not going to be worth the very much that you're going to end up losing in the process. Okay, so really think about this, and with that being said, hope to see you soon. And finally, stay tuned for next time, yeah? Next time, we're going to be looking at another contentious US election that people survived. They didn't go into civil war about it. The losing side just moved on, right? And that's the 1960 general election, sorry, the 1960 presidential election between Richard Nixon and JFK. So we're going to think about what would have happened if JFK had lost that. That was, again, a very close election, which, yes, there might have been some like kind of like vote rigging and stuff, but it's the thing of, you know, that the course of that election was respected, but also it changed the course of like American and world history. So we're going to look at some of what might have happened if that had gone differently. And in the meantime, stay tuned for a lot more videos. Check out some of our old one, and yeah, have a great day. Bye.